Hi everyone, we are Sora
And Hinano.
from Identify, a student organization located in Japan. In this YouTube channel, we interview students from all around the world, including those who have lived or studied in different countries. In today's video, we invited Fa from Thailand, and she talked about difference between Thailand and Canada, especially about social issues that they face and the attitude of young generation to solve them. So let's get started.
Okay, great. So tell us about your background, or the countries that you've lived in.
Okay, so my name is Fa, and I am originally from Bangkok, Thailand. So that was where I was born, and I grew up until middle school when I moved here for high school, and here being Victoria, BC in Canada. And so I kind of perspectives from these two sides of the world, I guess.
Yeah, very nice.
Okay. So can you tell us a bit about like Thailand and Canada, like where you live?
Okay. Well, I went to an international school in Bangkok, and so I think that kind of gives it a relatively different perspective from like a student who would go to a traditional Thai school.
Yeah.
Thailand, I think, has a relatively rigid, like traditional education system that has a lot of focus on memorization and things like that.
Asian
And,
thing.
like, it's very Asian style. The international school was an IB school, and so it was taught by like foreign teachers, and so it had a very foreign like perspective onto the education system. And so you would take classes all in English, and they would taught you in the more like American style, I guess you could say, or the international style, where they asked you to think critically and like do research and be creative. And so like my experience is probably a bit different from other students in Thailand. As for Canada, I'm in boarding school right now, so it's also different because I think when you're living with people all the time, it kind of creates a different like community. I think my Canadian school right now, so would be actually more similar to my international school in Thailand compared to my international school in Thailand and other Thai schools in Thailand.
So maybe comparing to one another, what do you like the most about each country?
Well, Thailand is home, I guess. Like it has my family, and also, and because it's home, I think I have more opportunities outside of school. I have resources and I have people that I can reach out to. But also, Thailand, I think, has a more like, or like the activities that you can do are more different, more like, it's like the activities in Canada are more like typical, like Model UN or like robotics or things like that, where maybe it's because I only do it in school, but even the volunteering is relatively typical. But if you're thinking in Thailand, you can go on like a historical tour in like the ancient ruins, or like you go hiking in the forest or things like that. I think there's more like cultural aspects to it, and it's more, I guess, more rich, more diverse.
Right.
You get to see more like different walks of lives. Like you get to and there's like street food, and there's like you can, it's more like vibrant in a way. Yeah. But in Canada, I think what I like about it is, I guess, that it's more like, I think I like the fact that it's different from Thailand. Like I think the perspectives that you get here are very different. They're more aware about things. Like they're more like, they're more liberal in a way, I guess. Like they would care about like First Nation rights, or like LGBTQ rights, or like things like that a lot more. They're more and they like to like bring a lot of different perspectives into like conversation in classes.
Internationally minded.
Yeah, it's a bit more of that. And I guess the opportunities in some ways are more available. Well, at least if you're like if you're volunteering or things like that, you can do it when you're younger in Canada. I feel because their students are usually more independent. Like I think that's just kind of the cultural aspect of it. But the students in Thailand, you can't really get a job in Thailand, like if you're not like an adult or your family really needs it, or like, and you can't really like volunteer like seriously if you're like still a high school student. And so like I think that's kind of the big difference. But like Canada has those opportunities, and you can like kind of go out on your own a lot more easily, and it's not as dangerous because it's maybe because I'm in a smaller city as well, but there's more independence.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
I think there's more of an emphasis on independence, unlike in Canada, where if you're 18, if you're an adult, like you're on your own kind of, and like you have to like fend for yourself ish. And like it's more common for Canadian kids to have to pay for their own university education, or like to not like really care about the rankings as much as the cost of a university education, which is really different from Thailand, or like I feel like Asian countries in general, where you go to the best school that you can get into, and your parents will afford it even if they have to sell their house to do it.
Right.
Yeah, definitely.
So, and I think that might have to do with, like I said, the welfare state, where like in Canada, if you don't get like the highest paying job, it's okay. Like there's a safety net. But in Asia, the kind of gap between the like richest people and the poorest people are very, very large. And so if you don't end up like with a good job, then you could it could be the difference between you like living in like a mansion or like a in the slums or something. Like it's very like big difference. But in Canada, it's more or less the same. And partially maybe that like Asian students are expected to also take care of their parents when they grow old. Like parents feel more like willing to just give up their life savings to like for their students' education, because it means that they will be taken care of when they're like older.
Different culture, I guess.
Yeah,
great. Well, thank you for your stories and also the time shared with us. Yeah, I feel like my prospect has like grown wider a bit.
and like me too.
No problem. It was great talking to you.
By contrast, what do you think is the most significant issue in each country?
I
In your
feel
point
like
of view.
well, in Thailand, I think like there's like the short-term issue, but like underneath, I think there's a long-term issue. The short-term issue, I think, is corruption. I think like that's kind of a big issue in a lot of developing countries. I think as long as like government money isn't going where it should be going, then it's like, you know, the country's not gonna really improve. And I think that means that corruption also means that the people in power like are also people who are like corrupt in a way, because you need to be corrupt to get into power. And so it creates this perpetual loop. And so I think that's kind of the big issue. It's not very student related, but like that's kind of but from a broad view. And also like I think the long-term issue in Thailand is that like you don't really learn critical thinking. I think kids, like students in Thailand, or at least a lot of the like Thai students who make up the majority of Thailand, like most people do not go to international schools. And so like those students don't really learn how to like think for themselves or to like create ideas. For example, in Thai class, you don't learn how to write essays like you do in English class. You would learn grammar, and you would learn grammar from kindergarten to like college, and you would keep learning grammar, and it's just like grammar. But here, like you learn how to like argue ideas and communicate and things like that. And I think that like makes a lot of difference. And it also means that you can innovate a lot more when you like learn how to think critically, and you can like be creative. And so I think that's kind of the big problem in Thailand. As for Canada, I think I would say that like perhaps in Canada the biggest issue might be like like I guess like people I don't know. I think no, I think Canada like really as a society is pretty like good. I think in terms of like the issues, I guess like the problem I see from my perspective, maybe it's because I'm an Asian and I'm looking in, is that like it's like people are more like complacent in a way. Like I think and I don't know if it's a like it's not a big issue that Canadians feel strongly about here, but I think I feel that like for example, you don't like most people are okay with going to a community college and like just getting a degree and then working, or like they or maybe it's just a I think it's perhaps a like part of just a government welfare system where they like people who are unemployed or like who have like lower wage jobs can still lead a really good life. And so like you don't have as much of that drive to like be the best, which like maybe is kind of a like bad thing in Asia as well, like where you try to push yourself too hard. But also like you don't get that culture in Canada. You like people are okay with like being a plumber or something, because being a plumber pays really really well. Like it pays as much as a doctor could get like paid per hour, right? So it's yeah, you don't have that like kind of need to like go to university and like try like work super hard in high school and stuff.
So for example, in Thailand, what do you think are the attitudes of young people in Thailand to like solving political or like other social issues? Do you think they are quite like active and like maybe like going to protest, posting on Instagram and stuff like that?
I think Thai youth are quite politically active, like compared to like other youth, or maybe it's just from my perspective, but I think a lot of the students who are like in my classes or things, they learn about politics, like they hear about it in classes. It's just something that's always kind of around them. Like I went to my first protest when I was 8 years old. It was something that yeah.
8?
Yeah.
And about what?
About like, well, it's really complicated. There's like in Thailand, there's kind of different like political sides, and there's always kind of protests going on. And so it's just like really big protests where they were like I think condemning the like previous government for like their corruption or something, and they were trying to like yeah, it's complicated. Yeah, and so and after that the military junta came in. Yeah, so and so it's kind of I think a lot of things like that kind of there's always protests going on, like always, like or until like the military came in. But before that, like as I was growing up, I've always heard about news about like people protesting like basically every night since like as far as I can remember. So it's something that I think has always been around us. There's definitely people who don't like care or like don't feel as strongly about it, but I think there's definitely a very strong group of youth who are like ready to create change. Like in Thailand, I think that the youth have always been like drivers of change, for good or for like evil or like for bad. But I think there's definitely a lot of political activism in like.
So you mean like young generation is more like active than adults to like
Yes, I
to
would
change
say
the
so.
politic?
Yeah, right now the youth like there's like a lot of protests right now that are led by like youth and things like that.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, well, there's definitely like the adults definitely do things, but I think like the most radical groups perhaps are the youth. Well, in my opinion, like it's that's kind of a broad like sweep of it. So like it's definitely not the entire picture, but yeah.
How about in Canada?
In Canada, I think they all like, or at least maybe I'm also quite political. So like the friends I hang out with are also politically minded. But I think there's definitely still that like sense of activism, but that activism are more I guess, more issue based. Like there'll be there's a lot of like things, they care a lot about climate change. Like climate change is a really big issue in Canada, and like you can get a lot of students out protesting about it, or like the protests about pipelines or things like that. But like it's different from Thailand, where in Thailand you really like protesting for change in regime, like you're protesting for change in government, like you're protesting like the entire system. But here it's a lot more issue based, and it's usually like I think smaller, more contained, and yeah, it's I think that's kind of the big differences between the two of them. But Canada, I think, definitely has politically minded like students. In fact, like I think a girl from our school like ran to become like a member of parliament in the province, like right after she graduated. So I think like the youth definitely has a voice.
Wow. My.
Yeah, and why do you think young people are more active? For example, in Thailand, you mentioned that young people are very like even more active than adults.
Yeah.
I think because they grew up with political activism. Like it's something that you see all the time. Like you see, like you open the news and there's people protesting and possibly fighting on the streets. And like I think you kind of, when you see a lot of things that are going wrong in like the world, you kind of you want to fix it. And whether that like method of fixing it works or not is debatable, but I think I think there's definitely a desire from the youth to like fix the country, because it's it's this kind of feeling that like you can definitely make it better, but than what it is right now. In Canada, I think it's more just like the culture, I guess. Like I think like people are taught about like making a change a lot, and so I think it's just kind of this idea that like you should be, and you should be fighting for like those things, and it's also part of their constitutional rights and things like that. So it's something that they can do, and like and they feel like perhaps they should do, like to exercise their rights as citizens. I think those are kind of the probably the reasons why they do it. Oh, and in Canada, like climate change is also like a really big draw for students, because they really like feel like its impacts are really eminent for their generation. And so I think that's also another reason why Canadian kids are really into the climate change movement. In Thailand, at least, the protests, like the activism, doesn't necessarily come from the education system. I think the education system really doesn't encourage it, like at all, or at least in the traditional education system. I think it has more to do with the idea that like, or like just social media and people like sharing information, and especially since like before there's actually like less majest laws, and there is some limitations to free speech in Thailand, which you can get in trouble for, like if you like see things in the media. And so I think like social media has really like made people more active, because they can like share information, or like they can share scandals that people have tried to cover up just like through social media really quickly. And I think when people see that, and they see the difference between the things they hear like from their friends, etc., and the things that they see in the media, it kind of like makes them feel like they should be doing something. I think Thailand kind of is that border between like feeling like a democracy and also like not being quite there yet. And so like I think and so I think that's kind of what riles up the like youth quite a bit.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it really is. In Japan, I think it's not very encouraged for Japanese like young people to go and protest and like be, like political active, because they would see that you're too radical and you're too different and you shouldn't do that. It's like Japanese culture. So I really think like it's very important for young people to like express their opinions and like stand up for their rights and what they think is right. And it's very
I
interesting.
totally agree.
So the last question is going to be, what is an international or domestic issue that you're most passionate about?
I think, well, I kind of touched on this earlier, but I think corruption is a really big issue in a lot of different countries. And I think it's a issue that inhibits growth. Very, like, I think it's the, like, issue that it brings down the standard of living for, like, and it sucks out, like the things that are supposed to be improving a country, and it's just taking it and giving it to people who are, like, being corrupt, right? And so I think and if you're trying to, like, give aid to a country, or you're trying to, like, increase taxes to, like, build a project, if things like continue being corrupt, then, like, I think that, like, inhibits, like, all growth. And even if you try to improve the other issues, you'll still be stuck with this, like, problem. And so I think, like, if I could fix one problem right now with the snap of my fingers, I would probably fix corruption, because I think it's probably the most pressing issue for, like, third world countries, or, like, developing countries. And it's also an issue that, like, I think, like, it's also I learned in class that, like, corruption is basically the bane of democracy, because as long as if you continue being corrupt, you can't, like, have that transparency and accountability that is required for, like, a free, fair, and free, fair election, right?
Yeah.
And also, like, I have never think about, like, corruption before. Like we don't really have, like, opportunity to think about that or know about that, you know.
Yeah, at schools.
Yeah.
I think, like, perhaps in Thailand it's more, like, closer to us. I think, for example, in my school, like, there was a case where a, like, officer, or, like, a person, one of the administrators was being corrupt and, like, funneling money outside of this, like, at the school. And so, like, when things like that happen, it feels really close to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you hear about it in the news all the time, and you kind of know that it's going on. And so, like, I think it's an issue that's probably underaddressed by a lot of, like, students, especially those who don't come from a developing country where they see that a lot. So
Yeah, that's definitely something that we should all, like, be studying about and, like, thinking about. Thank you, Far, from your precious stories. And thank you guys so much for watching this video until the end. Please do not to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up if you like this video. And until next time, bye.